Hello everyone, and welcome to what is kind of an unplanned, unscripted CK3 video where I want to talk about the recently revealed Roads to Power expansion and talk about some of the features that we've seen so far, but also kind of the hopes and expectations one could have for this DLC just off the back of Legends of the Dead. At first, I'm probably just going to break down some of the features that we've seen thus far and just talk about what we think we're going to be getting with Roads to Power. But more so than that, I really wanted to talk about what are the kind of things I'm hoping for the success of this DLC. Now, that's not really going to include content I hope to see, because that's really just going to be revealed by dev diaries as we go through the dev cycle all the way up until September. What I'm also talking about is some key factors to identify that might signal kind of the success and direction the devs have chosen to go down with this DLC as we progress through it. But we'll get to that later. Let's first take a look at some of the features we can expect in Roads to Power. So looking at the newly updated Steam page, we can look at the content that they say they're going to add in this major expansion. In this they talk about a new governing system, new ways for characters to progress up the societal ladder, and new activities for them to engage in. Interesting use of the word activities there, because that is an actual mechanic in the game, so maybe something else beside hunts and feasts, we're going to get something new. More specifically, we're looking at an administrative government, so that's going to be a new government type beyond feudal, tribal and clan. Now there's going to be administrative, in which governors are going to try and vie for power within the structure of the empire. So it's very difficult to really detect how this is going to work, but there is a small inkling of something we can look at later on. Next up we have family estate, which seems to be some kind of abstract domain which your family as a collective can use with unique buildings and structure of how that works. There is going to be an influence system, which so far as I can see appears to be a new mana system like gold, prestige and piety. Now there's going to be influence. We could be wrong on this isn't confirmed, but it seems the most likely system. With this, it may be the case that using your family estate, you're going to have to build up influence within your wider empire so that eventually you can have enough power to try and mount a hostile takeover for a position. Then of course is the great wild card of this DLC, Landless gameplay, where you can, quote, freely roam the map, untied to any realm or holding, going wherever the winds of fortune blow you. This will include contracts and building up a reputation of your own. Then it does talk about gold, prestige and fame, so kind of the similar stuff we're used to, until you eventually want to settle down and claim some land. Next up we see choose successor or Caesar, in which they describe spreading the influence you have gathered to determine the course of the empire and its successor. So this would appear to me to be a new succession law, away from primogeniture, and something specific to the administrative government. What's interesting here is whether you can choose a royal family member, a noble, a hero, or any other candidate. So the question is, why would you perhaps want somebody who isn't of your dynasty? Is there going to be an option to take advantage of putting somebody else on the throne? Maybe that's how the co-rule will come into play. Who knows? And closing out, we see new Byzantine flavour content and cosmetic additions, including events, monuments, so I assume that's going to be special buildings, as well as stuff in the Anatolian region on the map, and then again activities built around the Byzantine theme, including chariot racing. Good, good, good. And so, as we move on to the Steam images, I think we can talk about really why I want to make this video more. So, on the release of the announcement date video, which we see all the way into the 24th of September, there was some pushback and questions about why it's going to take 6 months since Legend of the Dead all the way up to Roads to Power. Interestingly, the devs actually responded by talking about how what they want to do this time is with Roads to Power, the dev diary cycle is going to be longer so that players can give their feedback and they can adjust for it accordingly. So I'm kind of hoping that by adding some ideas and reactions immediately, we can shape some of the outcome of what this DLC is going to be. And if nothing else, I think it could serve as a good indication of what one could expect for a good DLC, and maybe what could be a bad DLC, especially after the negative and mixed reactions we've seen since DLCs past, especially Legends of the Dead. But to quickly break down all the different things you might see on this particular image, of course right in the middle we have a central new, what can only be assumed to be some kind of major decision. We're playing as the Byzantines. We can see down here you are the Byzantine Emperor. You have reunified all of the maximum extent of the Roman Empire. Justinian's dream has been realised, which interestingly has a tidbit to do with maintaining the Byzantine culture or shifting to the traditions of your ancestors. So this could indicate there will be a way to restart your Roman culture, which previously was only possible through the ruler designer. Looking at some other things, in the bottom left we can see some new character art with the main emperor holding a large stick, the Rod of Power, which we can see in some more historical imagery. There is a new button located on the very bottom for opening up your family estate, which we'll take a look at later. On the bottom right, we can see a series of new decisions which look very Byzantine flavoured, commissioning an icon, holding a triumph, and preparing Greek fire dromons, which are some boats that, for Game of Thrones fans, might hold wildfire. We can also see some new art in terms of the UI for the date, which is also visible on the top of the screen. And very interestingly, at the top we have two major things of note. One of them is there is a new form of mana, or currency if you will. This has been basically confirmed to be influence, coming with the new influence system. Hello, yes, sorry for the interruption, but the image on screen says it's unconfirmed. But I was actually lucky enough to get the ad just on my phone randomly, so poor image quality aside, let's just quickly look through what we're looking at. So this is the chariot racing activity, and just from the feel of it, reading the text and looking at some of the options, it kind of feels like the Grand Tournament horse racing activity, so maybe it uses some of the same lineup for there, but in total, we have a new icon for it. There's some art depicting the Hippodrome inside of Byzantium where it's being hosted. There is of course the new intent to increase influence, which is basically your confirmation that the system up here is indeed influence, and also quite interestingly, on the right is a list of charioteers, which sorts them by influence. So green is good, but also there's white, which is also good for some reason. Then there's blues and reds. Kind of a strange information bar on the right, that's completely brand new. As a final note, we can of course see some of the new outfits with these interesting kind of medallions on their chest, and what I feel like is a new haircut. I do not remember this haircut being in the game. But that's enough from me, back to the video. And seems predominantly available in Byzantium or maybe administrative empires, we're not too sure, but this seems to be a new influence system. And the Decisions tab now has an additional sub-tab for Contracts, which has previously been indicated to be for Landless gameplay, but we're seeing that the Byzantine Emperor can access contracts, so maybe you can start contracts as well as taking them, who's to say, but very visible on this screen. With the main changes, as seen in this image being covered, what I'd like to talk about now is what could be a major stumbling block for Roads to Power, as I personally feel it has been in previous DLCs, and that's going to be about the game's ability to create compelling goals. Now previously, the game has added new goals for players to undergo. In Legends of the Dead, you try and unlock legend seeds and then spread those legends. In the Iranian Intermezzo, you have different endings you can go for to try and complete the Intermezzo. There are goals that you can try and go for, but they're all very finite in their scope. The amount of challenge types there are usually involve forming an empire or getting a character buff. Those are basically the main two endings. There are a few exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, create a title or get a character buff. The next stumbling block can be difficulty. In the case of Legends, once you had the level of prestige to start them, all you needed was gold to maintain their growth. There wasn't really anything stopping you, there wasn't anybody trying to deter you or shift to the legend. You just kind of let it go, and if you had money, it got stronger. And the last stumbling block I encounter with goals in the game can usually involve the rewards. At the start I mentioned how a lot of things are just forming empires or getting character buffs, but they're also finite and very short term, so once you've formed an empire, nothing really happens. There are no long-term consequences to forming an empire. Once you get a character buff, you die, and then nothing comes of it. So a lot of the time, even though the rewards can be good, they're quite short term in how they can affect your playthrough. This is where one can be hopeful about something like Justinian's dream realised, in which they're not just talking about the consequences of reforming the Roman Empire to its greatest extent, but we're also talking about changing the culture, your traditions, and that can have changes on the gameplay experience, bringing back a dead culture. I don't want to raise anybody's expectations too high for this DLC, as that can always cause problems later on down the line, but what I'm trying to say is, a good way to consider the outcome of this DLC could be the fact that the Byzantine Empire has kind of already been formed. You can't form a big empire when the big empire already exists, so what kind of goals you have to compete for inside of that empire is going to be really interesting to see what they come up with. As we saw with Legends of the Dead, there were really kind of 3 core types of legends, and a lot of the rewards, as soon as you had used them, pitted out. You could change the faith of your country, you could use a kingdom invasion, casus belli, but again, once the legend had been completed, you never really spoke of it again. And I'm really hoping that there'll be more rewards in the game, akin to like the Kingdom of Island Man, where you can get a dynasty modifier, so that even after you're long dead, the consequences of your actions for these great goals you have achieved can really be felt. And coming over to the next image, much more brighter than the previous one, and some more things to go over. So there is a new map table. As we saw with Legends of the Dead, they added a sort of background map table that you can explore. This one much more purple and regal. In the bottom left, we have a better view at some of the new art assets coming towards a Byzantine emperor, including his very trendy stick. On the right of the screen, in the list of submenus, we can see a new button to access what can presumably only be the administrative government screen. So because the Byzantine Empire is now an administrative government, there will be new mechanics involved in how the government is run, different governors inside of the government, and how they all work with one another. And then, I guess most prominently in the very centre of the screen, we have the Splintered Crusade. So with the new start date that's coming just during the 4th Crusade, you can expect to see some thematic events relating to the 4th Crusade, as the Doge of Venice might have gotten lost on his way to the Middle East and decides to just sack Constantinople. Just a few things that I think can be interesting to bring up here. Personally, I think the presentation of events surrounding historical timelines is really good, because even though yes, you can play characters however you want and change the fate of history, having some historical events come to fruition really builds up the environment of how you would react to those things happening. For that reason, I'm actually quite interested to see the different consequences of the 4th Crusade. Historically, as we saw with the rise of the Latin Empire, maybe if the Byzantines push them back and try and unify, they could form some kind of counteroffensive. Again, who's to say, but the event theme as it is, I really like. Just another couple of things to note, the use of purple text inside of the event is quite interesting, specifically for what appears to be an artifact. So I wonder now if artifacts and such things are going to have some kind of update relating to them, so you can maybe hover over it and see artifacts in events, or maybe they're going to have more of a vested interest in how maybe they're used in story events and such. I have long held that legendary artifacts are a massively underused concept in this game. The idea that there are these great, heroically famous items in the game, so if they're getting an update, I'm very happy, but as we always say, lower our expectations and you can never be disappointed. And well, we have arrived at what could be, arguably, the most controversial aspect of this DLC. For some people, filled with hope and anticipation, and for others, filled with doubt, fear and anxiety. It's the Landless mechanic. Before we dive into some thoughts, let's just break down what we see inside of the image itself. So, this is Landless gameplay, and in the bottom left we can see a little Landless man, which is identified by the fact that where usually you would see your primary title flag, you instead have your dynasty logo with a helmet on top, so this indicates that you are part of like a Landless group. To the bottom right of your character, there is a tent logo, which would most obviously open up this large menu we can see in the centre of the screen, which will be your camp, which I think is safe to say is the base of operations for Landless gameplay, effectively like your capital, which you can move around the map to indicate where you are as an individual. The camp itself seems to be represented by a pop-up window which has got some, personally I like the art style. I think I like this more than the Grand Tournament where it brings you into a separate window. If I was really going to hope for something, I think I'd actually hope that they went back to Tours and Tournaments, Grand Tournament, and built a screen like this for Grand Tournament with like a nice art style. So for the people who don't want to have to like be pulled out of the game into that menu for Grand Tournament, they can have this kind of sub-menu to interact with the tourney. But that's just a side for, not relevant to this. Let's keep talking about the image. So there are a series of buildings on here which you appear to be able to build up as a landless character, which kind of represents, I guess, court amenities mixed with like building up a barony, somewhere in between there I feel, and there are some button interactions at the top left. The free heads is a similar button to the free heads that would represent your council and court, so I assume this is the people who are going to be inside of your camp. To the left of that we've got a quill, which is usually how you rename things, so I assume you don't have to be called the Men of the Fens, and you can call your camp something else. To the left of that we've got a piece of paper, which is typically where you'd find out information in the top right of your screen about how much gold you're producing, how many levies you have per barony, important characters. So with this, I assume you're going to be able to find out information about how much supply you're creating, how much gold your camp has, who's there, that kind of thing. Oh, and I did mention the word supply because there is, well, a supply tent is a building inside of your camp, as well as a mess tent where one could turn supplies into food. But more importantly, there is a new mana/currency in the top of the screen represented by an apple, which, again, unconfirmed, but we can presume is going to be some kind of supply mechanic for your camp. In this way, it seems like there's going to be some challenge to playing as a landless character, and it's not just going to be an easy, you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want, with no consequence. You will have to provide supply for your camp. This may be most important because something they advertised about landless gameplay is about going away and building up an army in exile so you can come back and take territories and get some county for yourself. So if you're going to be building up an army as a landless character, you're going to need to feed that army. So it may be less about feeding yourself, but how big of an army you can muster while keeping it fed. And the last thing to take note of is this peculiar looking helmet icon located over, I think, Amsterdam. There are two opinions about what this could be. The first one is that's your camp, which it could be. That could be where your camp is inside Amsterdam. But I am more so leaning towards this is the button of a contract. So contracts, which we saw in your decision, could also appear as pop-ups on the map. It's kind of hard to say as we literally have no information about contracts at all at the time of making this video, but those are two potentials for what that could be. Now personally, I am very interested to see Landless play, but I am equally very cautious because the devs have been quite guarded about what exactly is the full extent of what you can do as Landless. Can you play as anybody in the regards to can you create your own character and go anywhere and do anything? And when you become Landless, what are you allowed to do? Like, what is the core gameplay? Without sounding too negative about DLCs past, it has come to my feeling that a lot of the times that new DLCs will come and they add, a good amount of mechanics, but a lot of the mechanics you can feel the full experience within 50 to 100 years of gameplay, as in one playthrough of one life, and you might have seen everything that a mechanic has to offer. This was true of Legends, where I completed both a Legitimizing, Heroic and Holy Legend in one life. I saw many of the events to do with plagues. The Iranian Intermezzo, I saw a lot of it, so you kind of get the point. Is it going to be that there is enough content to qualify playing the Landless mechanic more than once, or is it going to be the case that you try it out, you maybe build up an army, and you declare war for a duchy, like you're a Varangian conquestor, and then that's it, you've done it? Or maybe is there a lot of different types of contracts that you can interact with, and there's going to be enough variety there that it's really worth just staying as a Landless character? So far as I can tell, a lot of what the consequences of Landless gameplay could end up looking like is what are the types of contract the game is going to offer you. In my head, if I was just to theory craft some of the things it could be, you could be contracted by pilgrims to take them to the Holy Land and then back again, and maybe have some combat and danger as you do that. Or maybe you get contracted to help in a war. though I'd be very cautious to find if empires can contract landless characters to help them. Maybe they're like an alternative form of mercenary company. But equally, I really hope they don't shy away from the other side of the coin, which is criminal gameplay. Can landless characters still do raiding and effectively become vagabonds, completely separate from the law, become a criminal, raid everybody, take prisoners, become pirates? Like, these are also the kind of things I'm thinking about with landless gameplay, but the game doesn't too often stray into the realms of being a villain or a vagabond, so I'm very hesitant to even expect that kind of thing. The game does still show, in the finite amount of tabs that you do have as landless, decisions and activities, so I am hoping that maybe you can still go hunting, and maybe you can still attend grand tournaments, and maybe there are some unique decisions you can work towards, but maybe beyond this, I'm truly unsure. The penultimate image we see on the Steam page is of an estate, and it has a very similar image that we saw with the camp, but, well, a little more built up than just a tent and a tree. We actually have some buildings, and this seems to be a representation of your family estate. It would seem that in all of the images we've looked at thus far, we have always seen an estate and the influence mechanic in the same imagery, so I don't think it could be too much of a stretch to presume that there's going to be interactions between building up your estates and building up your influence inside of an administrative government. Beyond that though, we don't actually have too much information about how estates and camps will work. We did see a brief image of what a storehouse would look like, which has its own independent building chain, so the building mechanic has seen a slight upgrade, but this is exclusive to the estate system, not to the base game building system. I also think it's worth noting, when you look at the estate image here, and when you look at the camp image from earlier, you'll notice the weather is significantly different, where in one image it's very snowy, and in this image it isn't snowy at all. So I wonder if, even though there is this static art, there's actually going to be shifting art for your camps and estates, depending on the seasons, the location where the estate is held. For example, if it's in a mountain, is it going to look different? I'm unsure, but the weather system I think is possibly a strong indication that that will be in the game. I think the only thing I personally want to talk about when it comes to estates right here is I have a minor concern about them adding in this new currency, which is influence, and to what extent is this going to be useful in the game. So in the descriptions that they've talked about for the DLC, influence is going to be a metric by which you grow so that you can achieve positions inside of the Byzantine Empire and rise through the ranks to perhaps stick yourself, a family member, or a puppet on the Byzantine throne. While this sounds really interesting in regards to the goals that I was talking about earlier, an interesting challenge where you rise in a system, you use influence to create difficulty, how do you get influence, and maybe there could be some cool rewards from that, something in the back of my mind is stewardship, the first perk, meritocracy, claim throne scheme against emperor, you can declare on the emperor. It might be quite funny if there is this whole mechanic for rising through the ranks of the Byzantine Empire, and then it turns out it's simpler to just use meritocracy to claim the Byzantine throne and overthrow them. So maybe some hesitancy about if they've changed the way that that works, especially inside of Byzantium, because otherwise this entire system might be shot in the foot a little bit. Oh, and as a final note before we move on, there are new assets for the castles located inside the Greek and I presume Turkish places. So new little buildings to give more flavour to the environment. Good, good, good. And finally, we can wrap up this video with what is a very beautiful looking image, very great here. This is of course a royal court for the Byzantine Empire, and my goodness, it's easily the best one that there's been so far. It kind of reminds me of one I saw for a mod. I forgot the name of the mod exactly, but somebody had made a Byzantine throne room that looked very similar to this. But I guess that's what happens when you try to imitate history. People's designs will look the same. A few key things to talk about in this image. It's very interesting that the king is sitting on his own. Usually we've seen the two thrones next to each other, but in this one the king is centrally on his own and the queen is to the side. In addition, and this might just be me, this might just be my personal opinion, but I feel like there's far more people in this room than there usually is inside of a traditional royal court, where I might see like, I don't know, 8 to 10 people, but in this I feel like I'm looking at 20 people, not to mention the fact that the eagle-eyed among you, ooh, Byzantine's eagles, good one, the eagle-eyed among you, there's a guy up here, have you seen him? Just hiding up here? Usually you can click on the courtiers in your courtroom. If I click on this guy, or what is he cooking? I do not know. Beyond that, we can see some of the more traditional royal court interactions. I mean, there's furniture for this cabinet, which is in the game right now. There's the crown of Justinian, and there is a very interesting pedestal item here, which I believe is some kind of mechanical bird item, which was very renowned in the Byzantine period as being a marvel of engineering. I think though, what I really want to talk about is actually hidden away in the corner, and it's going to be a piece of furniture over here. That to me looks like a statue of a Roman emperor, and if that is the case, does that mean there are going to be more Roman artifacts in this game? I mentioned earlier how artifacts continue to be a massively overlooked piece of like world building and interest and things to collect, and if we can sort of start archaeology wise discovering things, finding cool Roman statues and busts to stick in our throne rooms, kind of rebuilding this idea of the Rome that was, now that could be a very great theme for Byzantium. In total, this entire video has basically just been a way for me to talk about my hopes, dreams, concerns, fears about the goals of this DLC. What is it that players are really going to be doing, like wanting to do in their campaigns after the next update? Because if it's with Landless gameplay, are we going to be playing as a mercenary, and how much content is there to do with that? How fun is it? When it comes to Byzantium, are we just growing the empire, or are there goals to strive for beyond that? I think there was some good indication to do with reviving a Roman culture that there will be more than just expanding Byzantium, but I'm really interested to see what they're going to be able to do. With the estate system, have precautions been taken to ensure that the difficulty of becoming the Byzantine emperor, the goal of becoming a Byzantine emperor, has that been sufficiently been made so that you can't take advantage of factions or the meritocracy perk to just skip an entire influence mechanic? Because otherwise, well, the influence mechanic is going to feel rudimentary, silly, bypassed, etc. And even here in the throne room, the idea of collecting ancient Roman artifacts to stick inside of your courtroom, these are some interesting goals, not necessarily because you're forming an empire or you're wanting a character stat, but you really want to build up a theme of a kind of glorifying an ancient age, and maybe you can get some separate benefits that can come from that. All in all, a very strange video by me. That's what happens when Hoi4 doesn't release dev diaries in so long. I start talking about CK3. No, but in all seriousness, I am excited for Roads to Power. I'm excited to see what they're going to do, and considering we've got a good series of dev diaries coming out with lots of detail, I'm probably going to be thinking about them, talking about them, and maybe, very maybe, making some videos about them, but we'll see. Anyway, with that all being said, I'll say thank you very much for watching. If you liked this very strange video, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and maybe I'll see you all next time. Bye.